Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turned multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. What's up, warriors? Welcome back to another episode of the Suburban Warrior podcast. Today's episode is going to be a tasty one. I am super excited to have an amazing restaurateur, Sydney Grims, with me today. And Sydney is the Director of Business Development at Fearless Restaurants, the group that's responsible for some of Philadelphia's most Instagrammable and not to mention delicious restaurants. After graduating from Cornell University, Sydney started working in New York City, where she clocked 70 plus hours a week. Hard work and putting in the hours wasn't a new concept for Sydney. She has been in the restaurant industry since 12 as a waitress, bartender, and even a laundress at the Four Seasons. And in fact, it's her work ethic that has allowed her to excel in the industry. And that's what it's all about, starting from the bottom. We are going to hear Sydney's story today, and I cannot wait because I am such a fan of all of the Fearless restaurants. Welcome to the podcast, Sydney.
Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, obviously anyone who is around in the Philadelphia mainline area knows about Fearless restaurants because there are so many of them, and they are all very delicious. Just, real experiences to go to, the food, the atmosphere, every single one of them unique. And so, but, we don't always get to hear about the people behind the restaurants, right? And makes them get to that way and how much hard work and effort it is. So I'm super excited to hear your story, being such a fan of your restaurant. So let's start, back from the beginning, like after college. How did you decide, that this was something that you wanted to do?
Yeah. So honestly, when I was in middle school, I started working in the restaurants and I got a taste for honestly just like making money. And I realized I like making money a lot more than going to school. So I never had the, when I went to college, I was like, let me just like survive college so that I can get out of here. And I ended up getting 2 very different jobs. One was in real estate finance and more of an analytical job. And the other was in restaurant operations. And I decided, hey, listen, like if I remember exactly where I was and like debating, I was like sitting at the baseball field over at Cornell. And I was like right outside the hotel school. And I was like, okay, do I take the job that like pays me more money, or do I take the job that's going to be harder now, but it's going to have a bigger impact probably later on? And I always knew that I wanted to come back and work with my dad at some point. I just didn't know obviously when that was going to be. So I decided to go and work in restaurant operations for a group called Hillstone, which has restaurants, most notably called Houston's or Hillstone. They have a restaurant called East Hampton Grill. So right after I graduated, I worked for this large family-owned company. They have around 60 restaurants. They gross $600 million a year as a family business. So I thought, hey, listen, like if I'm going to go and work for it physically in the restaurants, I want to work for the best family-owned restaurant group in the country. So that's what I did. And I had the privilege of going, and it was kind of like the real world. Like I lived with like 15 other people in a house out in East Hampton, and we like were servers and bartenders for the summer, which was awesome because we were not only being paid salary, but we got to make tips too. So that was a very fun summer. I remember my first night serving, I served Carl Icahn, the, financial billionaire. So that was like hilarious. And then one night I had Bethany Frankel telling me her martini, I wasn't shaking her martini cold enough. So I had a very interesting time out in the Hamptons. And that was really a fun summer. And then after that, what they ended up doing is they move you into New York City to finish out your intern, or not your internship, but like your manager training program. And they ended up, after the training program, staying and being placed in New York City. So it's a little militaristic. Like they put you through all this like grueling work. And then they're like, okay, now you're going to move to blank city. And I remember at the time, my boyfriend at the time was living on Long Island, and I was like devastated and was like, I can't leave New York. And I luckily was placed in New York City, which was close to my family. So I stayed there for about 4 years, rose the ranks there. And then I got a job with billionaire Ron Perlman and controlled basically all of the hospitality related to his life. So we fed around 1,000 people daily for our family-owned business, which is called McAndrews and Forbes, which was the holding group for all of his investments. And then I took care of all like service related to his life and food. We were kosher as well. So that was like a whole nother thing.
Wow.
But took care of like all of his food and beverage hospitality related to his life. So that was like 20 homes, the jets, the yacht. So figuring out how to like get chefs different places, hiring Michelin-starred chefs to cook for him. So that was a really, really fun job. And then my dad, it was kind of like a timing thing. And I was really unhappy with work. I just didn't feel like I was getting a lot out of it. And at the same time, it was probably one of the hardest times in my life, which was my relationship of 2.5 years, person who I was really in love with. Things were just not working out. So we broke up, and I left my job all in a matter of 2 weeks. And I remember calling my mom after I left my job, and it was around Thanksgiving. And I was like, I'm coming home right now. Like I'm not in good shape. I need to come home. And I went home for Thanksgiving, and I didn't come back to New York. So it was a really kind of like drastic move home. It was not what I was anticipating, but all of the stars really aligned. My dad at the time was, Penn had approached him to open up Louie Louie, or to open a restaurant at Penn. And my dad had talked to me about it in September and was like, hey, like, do you want to do this? Like, do you want to open a restaurant? And I was like, well, yeah, I do. But like, I have my life here. Like my boyfriend's here, my job's here, my friends are here. And all my best friends are still in New York City.
Yeah.
And so that was really like, it was a really hard decision, but within a matter of 2 weeks, I was like, I need to take this leap of faith now. Like my dad's getting older. I don't know how many more restaurants. He said Autograph is going to be his last restaurant. So when he got approached for this, I was kind of like, okay, like I remember discussing this with my then boyfriend and being like, I don't know, but I think I need to move home. So it was a pretty drastic move in the matter of 2 weeks, like signing a subletter for my apartment. But I truly, truly, truly believe that everything happens for a reason. And one of the reasons I believe that was because my cousin's girlfriend at the time she was looking for an apartment in New York City. And it was just the perfect storm of, hey, like her moving into my apartment. She was like, actually became one of the best friends with my then roommates. And so everything really worked out for a reason. So it wasn't pretty at the time moving home. I was probably at the saddest I ever was in my life, but it was the right move for me, for my career.
Yeah. And it's really funny how life does that to you, right? It's like, it's rarely that like one thing happens, right? It's like
totally
the job, the boyfriend, you're just like everything.
It comes in threes.
It always does. It comes in threes. But I feel like, to your point, it's definitely for a reason, because even though you didn't realize it then, you know, all of these things happening to you at once sort of not forced you, but in a way forced you to, you know, move home, be with your family. And with the timing of the opening of Louie Louie and doing that. And now here you are, you know, business.
Yeah, Chrissy, I have to tell you, I would not have moved home probably for another 4 years if that had not forced me to do it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
I truly would not have moved home. So,
and it probably wouldn't have been one thing that happened that, you know, if one of those things had happened, you probably still wouldn't have moved home. It was probably just like, you know, all of the events happening at once. And, you know, at the time you can't see it. And obviously you're just devastated because we've all been there, right? But like, here you are now. Looking back, you can see that it really was the best thing for you.
Yeah. Hindsight is always 20/20. It's like at that time, I literally thought like my world was imploding. And I would say that I felt in a way like a failure because I was giving up on New York City and I hadn't gotten to maybe the place where I wanted to be, buying an apartment and getting married. And I really learned from that experience. It's like, you really can't dictate your life. You just kind of have to let it go and be in the hands of the powers that be. And really in whatever you believe in, whether that's God, whatever, you really have to trust the process, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Bringing in another Philly term, trust the process. But let's talk about that for a second, because I think you're young. So you graduate from college, you go and you do all the things, you work, your butt off, and you put in all this time and you learn the business and you're in New York City. But then when it's time to leave because of all of these events that have happened, you're sad and you're feeling depressed and you're, like you said, you're feeling like a failure. But, is that because of the expectations that we put on ourselves? Is that because of the expectations? Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's been I feel like for the past 5 to 6 years, I think that's been the biggest learning experience that I have had has been, there's so many expectations I think that we put on ourselves when it comes to kind of hitting milestones based on years of your life. So, I'm 31 now. I would have thought that 10 years ago, I would have thought, oh, I'd be married and I'd be pregnant or I'd have a kid. And, fortunately or unfortunately, that's not what has happened. And that's had to take a lot of self-acceptance of hey, it will happen when it happens. And really doing a lot of deep diving to feel comfortable with that. Because I think that our whole lives growing up here, especially you go to a good school, you go to college, there are really big milestones associated with ages. And that was something that was really hard for me to grapple with, especially with the expectations of, I had this goal in my mind of being in New York for 10 years, because once you say you're in New York for 10 years, you're a New Yorker. And I really didn't expect to leave New York at 26, so it sounds funny, but I think that at that point in my life, sure, I had failed with trust me, I had failed with a lot of things, but I think that really had boiled down to one of those kind of internal pressures that I felt for myself of what being successful meant at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that we do that, to ourselves really throughout our life, have these expectations of what we think we're supposed to be doing based on societal norms or based on,
totally,
just the expectations that we put on ourselves. And I think that
based on social media as well.
Oh, totally. Oh my gosh. It's made it so much worse from the time when I grew up, because I'm not 31. I just turned 48, but we didn't have that pressure of the social media and for everything to just, look so happy and so wonderful all the time, because as we know, that's just not
how life goes. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Not how life goes. So I think that that's really amazing that, honestly, at 31, you're able to kind of have that perspective and look back and realize that okay, this is all happening for a reason. I put these false expectations on myself. So, I'm going to shift it now and I'm going to focus on me and myself and feeling great about me and the choices I make. So for people that, might be going through that right now, whether it's, they could be, going through whatever life change it may be, but having sort of false expectations, what is one piece of advice that you could give them that may be something that worked for you throughout that process as you were going through it that helped you realize what, I just really need to shift my perspective, or I need to focus on this habit or something that helped you in that process?
I think honestly, it was finding a group of, for me, I'm extremely extroverted. I like to be surrounded by friends. And I think the biggest soul crushing thing for me is just not having my friends physically with me at the time. I had gone from living in a sorority with 45 girls, living in New York City with 4 people. So when I moved back to Philadelphia, finding your group, so to speak, women who are really going to challenge you. And I joined a organization which I felt like I was surrounded by like-minded people. And they were all very, very different from me, different walks of life. most of them were actually moms, probably in their 50s and 60s. Another one was a nun who was in her 80s, who I became friends with. And,
awesome.
And I think that I found a group of women who had like-minded values, and we basically did a study together. And that's how I really kind of, I felt like I was living my true, who I was meant to become, if that makes sense, rather than the lifestyle of the rich and famous, so to speak, in New York City. So I think that there was a lot of personal growth when I came home, of kind of like unlearning habits when I was in New York. One of them being like, I became very snappy, and I'm still a very intense person. But I think one of the things was my tone just became really ridiculous. So I think that was one of the biggest things that I felt like, if you're in that kind of a spot, finding a group where you can learn, not just talk, but learn from other people.
Yeah, I love that piece of advice, because I think, honestly, finding a community and finding people that you can surround yourself with that can lift you up, but also that are different than you, right? I mean, in life, I feel like seeks like. So a lot of times,
Absolutely,
our circle are people like us, which is great. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's so amazing. And so there's so much growth when you can sort of get out of your comfort zone and maybe join a group that you typically, wouldn't find your friends joining, or, find mentors that are different than you, because you really find so much growth in that, and in surrounding yourself with a community of people like that. It's awesome. I love that.
Absolutely. The biggest thing is when living in New York, I really realized that I was friends with people based off of convenience, right? So I've learned that there's three different types of friends. One, which is convenience, which are people that are in your common circle, maybe that it's easy to run to the gym with. And this is actually something that I learned from these group of women. One was convenience. So it's friends of convenience, people that you run into at the gym, people maybe that you're at work with. Then you have friends based off of virtue, people that will challenge you to be better. And when you hear things that maybe you don't necessarily want to hear from friends, but will challenge you to be better people. And then the third, which is friends based off of kind of maybe friends that you've been friends with from childhood. So they're childhood friends.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are where you are at in your time of life as you get older.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of important to have all three, right? A nice little mix of community that we can surround ourselves with. And
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think when you are coming back or you're joining a community, really ingratiating yourself in that community is very important. Joining different clubs or organizations or Facebook groups or meetup groups, whatever it is, can really help you, obviously.
So tell us so you move back, from New York City, you decide to take on this challenge and start working with the family business. I think Louie Louie was your first restaurant, I believe. But tell us, because I know you sort of had to make a shift in the whole family business to really, modernize it in a way and change
Absolutely.
it, right? Because change is never easy, but change is necessary. So tell us what that was like for you, as you're still a young woman coming from New York City. You have experience under your belt, but here you are with this new challenge. How did you, really face that?
Yeah. I think one of the best things, honestly, my dad is incredibly, being an entrepreneur, you're used to change and you want change and you welcome it. And I think that is something that he really embraced with me coming on board. Was he was willing to change, willing to listen to new ideas. And I think that if I had come to a family business that was not willing to change, it would have been a different outcome, honestly, because I have friends who have moved home and have joined family businesses, and honestly, it hasn't gone well. And this one individual, he actually left his family business and is now working for another person's family business, and it was purely because his family was not willing to kind of adapt and change and grow. And so I think that that's something that my dad did really well was giving me a lot of autonomy to make decisions and to mess up. I mean, there were certainly times where I made calls that were not the right calls, but he allowed me to make those calls, which I think was really important.
Yeah, that's totally important, right? That's how we learn. It's awesome.
Absolutely. And so I ended up, Louie Louie was the reason why I was moving home was we had this opportunity to open this restaurant. But really, when I came home, opening a restaurant takes probably around 2 years from start to finish. So I had a kind of like a year gap in between to figure out and to make improvements. And one of those was rebranding the Moshulu and really bringing that to its full potential with the Deck Philly, which is outdoor dining, and really reinvigorating special events there and the rebrand of it to attract not only, baby boomers and Gen X, but really getting into millennials as they were coming into their, largest spending time, so to speak. In your 30s, 40s, that's when your earning potential is the highest. And I saw that we had a large opportunity for capturing that audience, which we hadn't before. So I worked on that for a year, and that was really my first baby, so to speak, prior to Louie Louie.
That's awesome. And that really was successful, right? I mean, by adding the Deck to Moshulu, it really did attract those millennials that you were hoping to.
Absolutely. I think that for us, we were in a spot where Moshulu was a place where people perceived it as just going there for a special occasion or as a destination rather than using it more for really any occasion. You wanted to go for happy hour, you could go. You wanted to go for a late night event, you could go. You wanted to go for a wedding, you could go. You wanted to go for your rehearsal dinner, you could go. So there's so many reasons to use it. And I think that it became incredibly successful to the point where we ended up having to add more managers. We brought on 3 people in their private event department. So we really grew the business that way. And it's now our top grossing restaurant.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
How many restaurants are actually in Fearless Group?
Yeah. So we have technically 12 restaurants. We have 10 restaurants, a hotel property that we own down in Miami that we're silent partners in. And then we have 2 restaurants currently under development, which is the White Dog in Chester Springs, which will open the end of 2023. And then Rosalie in Glen Mills, which is actually in the same parking lot as the White Dog in Glen Mills in Britton Lakes, which will also open the end of 2023. So we will be having, we'll be having twins.
That's awesome. And I love them all. So, I'm curious, being a woman, being the head of business development for such a large organization that is really pretty visual and public, because restaurants obviously are pretty, out there and everyone sees what's happening. Tell me what are the challenges that you faced as you were sort of taking on this role and, starting these new restaurants?
I think that I really had to come in and prove my worth, so to speak, and earn my stripes. And I think that that's what the Moshulu project allowed me to do prior to doing Louie Louie. So I think that allowed me to really earn my stripes. I think with the people who have been, my dad has created a really incredible culture within our organization. And we have not had a lot of turnover with our senior managers. So we have people who have been with us for 25, 35 years, and to really earn their respect. And I think I needed to do that. I couldn't be, when I first approached it, I wanted to be the loudest person in the room and to have the biggest opinion. And I quickly realized that was not gaining, loyalty, so to speak. So I really had to kind of change my approach and just put my head down and work. And I think that that's what the Deck at Moshulu really proved to everybody, was reinvigorating that concept, and they saw the financial gains of that. And I think that that's really how I won my stripes, so to speak. I think that was probably the hardest thing, was these people who are much older than me and who have been with him loyally for many years and earning their respect. I think that was one of the biggest challenges. I think the other biggest challenge was learning to take feedback from people who I've known my entire life. I think that was really hard. People who have known me since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And so I think that there was definitely a perception like, oh, she's like my little sister rather than coworker. And so I think that like bridging that gap and really like understanding the culture that I was moving into was a much healthier culture than the two previous companies that I came from. So I was a very, I would say very like defensive and very like throw people under the bus kind of mentality from the two companies prior that I had came from. So to come into a culture that was much more easygoing and accepting, I think that it was very challenging for me.
Wow. That's interesting. I think it's really, not always very easy to adapt to new cultures. But especially coming in, like you said, family business, coming in at the position you were coming in, really trying to earn your stripes. I think it's great that you recognized pretty early on that the culture was different and you were going to have to sort of change how you were used to working in order to work with these people. Because that's the case a lot of the times. I mean, we just have to be adaptable, right?
For sure. Yeah. I think that it's important to identify people when you're joining a new organization who can kind of be your cheerleaders and your mentors, and approaching it from that perspective of, hey, I want to learn from you. Clearly, I'm not doing something right here. Can you teach me? Yeah. It's not a new concept, right? But I think that when you're actually acting it out yourself, it's incredibly humbling.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious. So I love all of the restaurants. I think they're so amazing. Do you have a favorite?
Everybody always asks me this.
Yeah, right. Like, so I mean, it's like picking a favorite child. I'm sure it's literally not easy to do. But
my dad would say whatever one is the most profitable, but I would say the one that I enjoy. I think that it really boils down to the teams at the stores and which one do I enjoy working with the most. I don't know. It's really hard to say, but I would say that I love the food at Rosalie. I just think it's incredibly special. And I really love that you can go there and have, pizza, or I can have shakshuka for brunch, or you can go there for a lot of different reasons. And it's right down the road from my house. So I would say that that's probably the favorite child at the moment.
Oh, I love it. And the atmosphere is absolutely beautiful. And the lounge is incredible.
I love the lounge, like going and listening to music on a Friday or Saturday night and just some light bites, or like finishing your night off. Maybe you had dinner somewhere else and you go to listen to music and grab some dessert. Like it kind of can add some like fun to the main line when it feels like a little sleepy on a Saturday night,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the vibe there. It's really, it is a very special place. And then you drive like 2 blocks down to White Dog, and it's just this like, again, beautiful, but very different in a different way with White Dog, and every room looking different. And the food is just incredible. And it's such a warm atmosphere. So I love how all of the restaurants are just so different and very special in their own way.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today and for sharing your story, because again, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, as we get to go in and enjoy all this delicious food and wonderful service and amazing atmosphere, but we forget, I think, about how much work goes into running these restaurants and the food being delicious, and then sort of running like the well-oiled machines that they run like. And I really do feel like they are just that, well-oiled machines that really create special experiences for anyone who goes there. And, let's be honest, when we go out, I mean, I feel like post-COVID, like anytime anyone goes out, like you just want to have a good time. You want good food, good drinks, and you want to be with great people and have a great time. And I think all the Fearless restaurants really do just that. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, congratulations on all of your success. Of course. So I would encourage all my listeners and, around the Philadelphia and Main Line. And for those that aren't, check them out online at Fearless Restaurants. And you can find Sydney. Sydney, where can they find you on social?
Yeah, just Sydney Grims is my handle on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, we will link that in the show notes for everyone who wants to follow along on the journey with you. And thank you so much for joining us today. It was so great to hear your story.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. All right, guys, thanks for joining. We will see you next time for another episode of the Suburban Warrior Podcast.